today I'm going to use my book Linear Freedom as the basis for building your own gospel chops. And I just want to say before I begin, there is a sort of psychosocial context, historical context to the rise of gospel chops. I'm not going to be talking about that today. While I respect that that exists, I am talking specifically about the drumming today. So I encourage you all to check out the history of gospel chops. It really is fascinating. But today I am just talking purely about the drumming. Now, the drumming itself has its basis in linear playing. So that's what we're going to be primarily interested in today. But gospel chops specifically takes some linear phrases and does some really interesting things to them, as we will see. The first thing we need to do is develop some basic linear capacity and put that basic capacity to good use. So as our bassist in today's video, I'm going to be taking page 47, accent study 7, bar number 2, from Linear Freedom. Now, don't worry if you don't have the book. I will make sure everything is displayed up on screen. If you do have the book, this is going to be page 47, accent study 7, bar number 2, in case you want to follow along. Now, do bear in mind, in today's video, we are taking that bar of 16th notes as an isolated example. In the book, in the chapter, in the study, it is part of a much greater concept for general linear freedom. But today we are just taking one very isolated phrase. So please try not to think of this as just a lick. Think of this as just taking one very small snippet from a much larger context. The phrase in question, bar number 2, as I've hinted at, is a 16th note phrase in 4/4. 16 notes, 4 groups of 4, 1 E-ander, 2 E-ander, 3 E-ander, 4 E-ander. That is the rhythmic basis for our starting point. Before I do anything else, I will show you the basic phrase. It sounds like this as 16th notes. 3 E-ander, 4 E-ander. This phrase is built around 16th notes, played as a single stroke roll, and the concept is substitution. We are substituting some of those single strokes for bass drum strokes, either one at a time or two at a time, and we are retaining the single stroke sticking either side. I'm not going to get too bogged down with the concept. For those of you that are interested, it's in the book, right? But that is our basic concept at play here. I will put the basic phrase on screen, and I will highlight the basic phrases that constitute this longer phrase. It looks like this. Now, I'm not going to get too bogged down in how this phrase was built, but as I've hinted at, this comes from a much larger concept which is found in the book. But anyway, our phrase looks like this. It is 16th notes and it is 16 notes long. So this is going to fit really neatly into a bar of 4/4. As always, your first job is to become technically proficient just at the basic phrase. So I'm going to play it a few times. I'm going to start on the snare drum, then I'm going to start moving those phrases around the drums. I will keep the hi-hat on the beat so you can hear how this sits. 1 E-ander, 2 E-ander. Now, this is the most important phrase of your development here because you need to be able to hear that phrase in any position of the drum kit. Notice I said hear and not play. The playing is actually the easy part, especially if you just stick it around the drums, right? The problem is when you find yourself in an unfamiliar position, perhaps phrasing it between the hi-hat and the snare drum or the hi-hat and the ride cymbal, you suddenly hear that phrase in a different way. And if you're not prepared for that, it can throw you. So we want to be hearing this phrase just as straight 16th notes in as many different orchestrations as we can, right? Because we will start to hear the melody, the rhythmic pulse of this phrase. No matter where we play it, there is a distinct rhythmic pulse, a melodic signature that this phrase exhibits. We need to be hearing that. We need to be able to play that and hear that anywhere. So I really can't stress enough how important this stage is. Take it slowly. Don't just focus on your technique. Of course, we want a clean, consistent, accurate execution, but you want to be able to hear this. You want to be able to count this. You want to be able to feel this and internalize this straight away, really easily, because the next step, which takes it away from this rhythmic structure, is really going to be impossible if you can't hear that basic melodic signature, right? So really take your time with this. Start slowly to a metronome, count out loud, build it up. So straight away, just as a 16th note phrase, we've got a nice linear fill. We can use it in context, something like this. So straight away, just from that, we can hear we've got some really versatile and interesting fills at our disposal. We've got this basic 16-note phrase, and we are orchestrating it at will as 16th notes. That's really cool. The first thing we want to do is also get comfortable with this as 32nd notes. A lot of linear phrasing, some of the gospel chop stuff especially, are 32nd note based. So we can again practice this, but at a slightly higher rhythmic rate. I'm not going to take it blazingly fast because that's not the point of today's lesson, as we shall see, but 32nd notes, dagger, 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 3E and 4E and we are feeling that as 32nd notes now, 8 times per beat. Dagger, 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 dagger. Now, one of the things that the gospel chops players do a lot of is working between the hi-hat and the snare drum, right? We can take these around the drums all day long and they sound really nice, but working it on the hi-hat can give you this this clean, crisp kind of little flurry that really makes people go, wow, what was that? So we want to start by exploring these as 32nd notes, perhaps within a groove. Now this is one of the perks of 32nd notes. Because we are doubling the note value, we are halving the time the phrase takes, right? So now we don't have to play twice for a full bar of 4/4. We can play only 2 beats of the bar. Because the 32nd notes will only take up, for example, beats 3 and 4, we can groove for the first 2 beats of the bar. 3E and 4E and is our 32nd note phrase played just on the hi-hat. So to demonstrate that, I'm just going to play 1 and 2 and as a standard groove, 3E and 4E and our phrase played as 32nd notes, both hands on the hi-hat. Now, with a little bit of orchestration between the snare drum and the hi-hat, we can get some really interesting sounding phrases straight away, just by moving those hands. Same thing, 2 beats of the bar as the groove, 2 beats of the bar as the 32nd note fill. I'll extend that now, 1 bar of groove, 1 bar of fill. Now, this is already sounding great, but it's not enough. Before we move on though, I'm just going to give a recap of what we've done so far. We've taken a very simple 16th note phrase. We've memorized that phrase. We have orchestrated that phrase. We've played it around the drums just as simple 16th notes. Now, our most recent step, we have converted it to 32nd notes and we've played it between the hi-hat and the snare drum. Just that act of orchestrating a 32nd note phrase between the snare drum and the hi-hat can really give you this kind of staccato, syncopated feeling that is characteristic of gospel chops. Already, that sounds great. So I would encourage you at this point to play around with some linear phrases you may already have, convert them to 32nd notes, and try incorporating them into your groove into small segments, maybe just one beat of the bar, two beats of the bar, or maybe the entire bar, just phrased between the hi-hat and the snare drum. But, as I said, this is not enough, and as I hinted at earlier, this is not simply about speed. Believe it or not, gospel chops is not just about speed. Gospel chops is about the rhythmic aspect. What we're going to do now is we're going to take that 16th note phrase. We're not going to play it as 16th notes. We're not going to play it as 32nd notes. We're going to play it as 128th notes. No, of course we're not. We're going to play it as 16th note triplets, right? The reason we're going to play it as sixes is because not only are sixes fast at any given tempo, but the two rhythms don't add up. Not straight away, at least. Our phrase is 16 notes long. A 16th note triplet rhythm is 24 notes long because we have 6 strokes per beat. 4 lots of 6 is of course 24. We are taking a 16 note pattern and we are kind of stretching it into a 24 note rhythm. The way that happens is the rhythm repeats, but that repetition does not sit neatly into a bar, so we get this polyrhythmic effect. We have to roll over, in this case, into a second bar before this phrase resolves. Now, this is all a little bit confusing if you're new to polyrhythmics, but the basic gist is quite simple. We are taking a phrase of one length and we are playing it in a rhythm of a different length. In this instance, we are taking a phrase that is 16 notes long and we are playing it in a rhythm that is 24 notes long. Because they don't line up exactly, that rhythm, that bar, that phrase is going to roll over numerous times until we get back to the beginning and everything lines up again. Lots of talk, lots of theory. The only way you're going to get good at this is by practicing this. Because this is a rhythmic challenge, you need to be counting this. So, move away from the drums. We're going to play this just between the hands and the foot on our lap, for instance, just on my leg. Give yourself a nice raw leg practicing this linear phrase. The reason we want to move away from the drums is because this is not a playing issue, this is a counting issue. So we are going to play through our phrase, but we're going to apply a 16th note triplet count to this. 1 and a 1 and a 2 and a 2 and a 3 and a 3 and a 4 and a 4 and a 1 and 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and 4 and oh, we've run out of space. Now we need to go to the second bar. In this instance, it starts on beat 3. 1 and 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 and 4 and 4 and That is hard to do slowly, and it is hard to do without looking at the bar to remind myself of it. I have spent a lot of time internalizing this, so it's easy for me to do. To do it slowly and count, that is a bit of a challenge, but that is what you need to do. We need to be able to play that phrase over and over again, counting it as 16th note triplets. I'm not going to put this on screen because it looks like a total mess. Instead, I want you to imagine the individual phrase as it originally appeared and get used to counting it in a different way. Next, we're going to apply this to the drums. I'm going to play it on the snare drum. I will give you the quarter note pulse on the hi-hat. Please try and count it along with me. 1 and a 1 and a 2 and a 2 and a 3 and a 3 and a 4 and a 4 and a bit mind-bending, right? That can be really tricky. That's a big stage, a big hurdle to overcome, but it is well worth it because once we have got that, our next step is to orchestrate as before. 3 and a 3 and a 4 and a 4 and a So as we did last time when it was still 16th notes, we're going to try taking this just as a simple fill now. So I'm going to play 2 bars of a groove, and then our 16th note triplet fill is going to take up 2 bars. So when we get to that fill, 1 and a 1 and a 2 and a 2 and a 3 and a 3 and a 4 and a 4 and a. Now already that's sounding great because we are taking an unfamiliar rhythm, right? We're taking a phrase of 16 notes and we are playing it in a rhythm that is 24 notes long. So that is giving us this kind of 2 trains passing in opposite directions feeling. We're playing in one thing, but it sounds like something else. It sounds really cool and it is fun to play. It sounds great. You have to be able to keep track of where you are, right? There is nothing worse than going for some polyrhythmic linear fill and going, oh crap, where's the 1? Because then it's useless. You've lost your place, you've lost time. So you really need to be counting this, right? Now, to get the full effect from this, like we did with the 32nd notes, we want to start getting the hi-hat involved. These sound really nice when phrased between the hi-hat and the snare drum, specifically within a groove. So let's just try phrasing that as a 2-bar pattern just on the hi-hat. So as we did with the 32nd note phrases, we also want to start playing with these between the hi-hat and the snare drum. A bit of orchestration between the two can really take up this phrase and disguise that overall pattern. Remember, you don't want to disguise it from yourself, you still need to be able to hear what's going on, but it's quite cool if you can disguise the overall melodic phrase, especially if you've used it repetitively. Straight away they sound really interesting, really cool, and if you can start incorporating them into your grooves in a way that makes sense rather than just groove, 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 here's a crazy linear fill, groove, 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 if you can actually incorporate them, they start to sound really nice as well. So just to recap what we've talked about then, we've taken a very simple phrase. In this instance, it was 16 notes long. You can use shorter phrases, you can use longer phrases. We have become comfortable with it in its basic rhythm, in this case 16th notes. We've taken our 16th note phrase, we've orchestrated it, we've worked on it, we've become comfortable with it. Now, here is the crucial part to turn it into what might be considered a gospel chop, right? We have taken it out of its natural note value. So we've taken it from 16th notes and we've turned it into 16th note triplets. So this is where we've got a mismatch between the phrase length and the rhythm length. If you can apply your orchestration, your speed, your power into that polyrhythmic effect, you're going to get some really nice results. You're going to get what really sound like these gospel chops that are really famous, that are really interesting and are really spectacular. Now, a word of warning, please don't use these at your wedding gig, right? These are an explosive, powerful musical device that should be used with taste, used in the right context, not just because you can. Use these sparingly, treat them like your heavy artillery, bring out the big guns when you need them, and hopefully you'll have some fun, raise a few eyebrows, but don't get yourself fired. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you want to get more of the linear stuff going on, please check out Linear Freedom. It's available now, it's published by Artificer Productions, and it is a really in-depth, comprehensive guide to linear drumming from A to Z. So have a look, check it out. There's plenty of other videos on my channel all about it, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks a lot.